I was 19 when they left her. They didn't cry, they didn't hug her, they didn't even say goodbye. They just signed the discharge refusal forms and walked out the doors of Silver Pines Nursing Home like she was a problem finally solved. I remember standing there in my pale blue scrubs holding a tray of Ensure shakes, watching them disappear through the glass double doors. Her son, his wife, two grandkids with designer backpacks and blank stares. One of them checked his phone before stepping into their Lexus. They didn't look back. The administrator tried to sound professional. "It's not uncommon," she said. "Families sometimes struggle with the long-term nature of care. Don't take it personally." But it was personal. I had seen the way Eleanor's eyes searched the hallway that morning, the way her hand trembled as she clutched a photo of her husband in uniform. She had been waiting for them. She was 84, once a high school literature teacher, a woman who loved Emily Dickinson and orange marmalade. Now she was mostly bedridden, sometimes forgetful, always polite. She called me Rose half the time, which wasn't my name, but I never corrected her. I just stayed, because someone had to. That evening, while helping her settle back into bed, she asked in a whisper, "Are they coming back?" I tucked the blanket gently under her arms and said the only thing I could. "No, Eleanor, but I am." She closed her eyes, and from that night forward, I was no longer just the night shift aide. I was hers, and somehow she became mine. That was the night they walked away, and the night I stayed. The next morning, the director of nursing pulled me into her office. She looked tired, like someone who had delivered this kind of news too many times. "Maya," she said gently, "Eleanor's family has officially withdrawn all financial responsibility. They're not paying for continued care. We'll have to initiate state transfer within 72 hours. State transfer. It sounded so official, so procedural. What it meant was this: Eleanor would be moved to a county facility with minimal staffing, no private rooms, and underfunded resources. A place where people like her faded quietly without names, without stories, without visits. I sat there frozen. I was just an aide. 19, working nights to pay rent on a shared apartment, no degree, no savings. But I couldn't let them take her away like that. Not after they had already erased her. "Is there any way she can stay?" I asked. The director sighed. "Unless someone steps in to assume private pay status." "I'm sorry, Maya. She's a sweet woman. I know you two are close." I walked out of that office with my hands shaking and my heart pounding. I didn't have anyone to call. My own mother had passed the year before, and I hadn't heard from my father since middle school. I stood outside Eleanor's room watching her nap, her chest rising and falling slowly, a paperback resting on her lap, one of the old ones she used to teach. I thought of how she lit up when I read to her, how she once said I had a voice that made the words feel like home. That night, I opened my small savings account. I had $2.117.43, money I had been saving for nursing school. I signed the private care papers at the front desk. I told them to use everything I had, and I picked up 2 more shifts a week. I didn't tell Eleanor. Not yet. She didn't need to know that she had been left again, only that she hadn't been left alone. At 2:00 a.m., while changing her bedding, she stirred slightly and said, "Did they call?" I smiled softly. "Not yet, but I'm still here." She blinked, then reached for my hand. Her fingers, paper-thin and cold, wrapped around mine with surprising strength. "You always were the gentle one," she whispered, not quite awake. Maybe she thought I was someone else. Maybe she didn't. Either way, it didn't matter. Because I wasn't staying for recognition. I was staying for her. The first few weeks were the hardest. I barely slept. I worked the overnight shift at Silver Pines, took weekend work at a nearby assisted living facility, and cleaned houses 3 mornings a week for a woman who paid in wrinkled bills and oversweet lemonade. But Eleanor began to change. Not dramatically. Not in the way people hope for when they hear the word recovery. But in small, almost imperceptible ways. The kind of changes only someone who stays would notice. She started humming again. She began requesting her favorite poems, Emily Dickinson, on quiet mornings, Langston Hughes on rainy afternoons. Sometimes she'd forget entire verses. then surprised me by reciting them perfectly in the middle of the night, as if the lines had returned to her in a dream. "Hope is the thing with feathers," she murmured once while I adjusted her oxygen line. "That perches in the soul," I finished. She smiled. "And sings the tune without the words, and never stops. At all." We became each other's routine. I brought her slices of toast with marmalade before the breakfast trays arrived. She corrected my grammar when I read her articles from the newspaper. When the nurses were too busy, I brushed her hair and tied it back with velvet ribbons I bought from the thrift store. We'd sit for hours by the window talking about anything what she taught in 1968. The shoes I wanted to buy someday, the way the light shifted through the trees outside her window. She asked about my future once. "Do you want to be a nurse, Maya?" "I think so," I said. "I'm not smart enough for med school and I don't want to do anything else." She frowned. "Don't ever say that again. Intelligence is not about where you go. It's what you do with what you know." That night I registered for GED classes online. I studied between medication rounds and linen changes. I took practice tests on my phone during my breaks. When I passed with a nearly perfect score, I told Eleanor before anyone else. She clapped. Really clapped with both hands. "I knew you would," she said. "You're too stubborn to fail." She asked to see the certificate. I framed it and hung it on the wall across from her bed. We celebrated with tea and shortbread cookies from the vending machine. She insisted we toast with plastic cups. "To your bright, inevitable future," she said. I tapped my cup against hers. "To us." It was around that time that the director approached me with a new opportunity. The facility was starting a mentorship program for young caregivers, short workshops on elderly care, grief navigation, dementia communication. She asked if I'd consider helping design the materials. "You're with Eleanor more than anyone," she said. "Your notes in her chart are the most detailed we've seen." It felt surreal. Me, the overnight aide who still ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner. But I said yes. The work was small at first. I helped plan a memory hour where residents could share stories from their youth. I organized a volunteer group to do hair and nails for the women on weekends. I created pamphlets titled "Gentle Care: What to Say When They Forget You." And Eleanor, she became our unofficial mascot. "She's a miracle," one of the nurses said. "She should have been gone a long time ago." I didn't think it was a miracle. I thought it was love. One evening, as I filed Eleanor's meds and straightened her bed, she said, "You're not just taking care of me, you know." I looked up puzzled. "You're learning how to take care of yourself." She was right. She always was. That winter, we moved her into a private room with a better view. I paid the difference for my extra shifts. She called it the penthouse, even though it was just 1 floor up and 6 feet wider. "I can see the trees better from here," she said. And I knew what she meant, because by then I was seeing more clearly too. By the second year, everything had changed quietly, steadily, like moss growing on old stone. Eleanor still had her bad days. She sometimes forgot where she was or who I was. But when she remembered, it was with a warmth that filled the whole room. "You've been here a long time, haven't you?" she'd ask, tilting her head like a curious child. "I have," I'd say. "Then I suppose you must be family." And in a way, she wasn't wrong. That spring, the administration offered me a full-time role as a caregiver educator. It came with a modest raise, a better schedule, and access to a local program that offered free night courses in gerontology and end-of-life care. I enrolled without thinking twice. Eleanor beamed when I told her. "You're becoming the woman I would have written books about," she said. "You already did," I replied, holding up her old teaching manuals. We laughed. She began writing again, not full chapters, just short reflections, sometimes only a few lines, scribbled in shaky cursive. I bought her a thick journal with lavender pages and called it her memory garden. Together we filled it with fragments of her past. How her husband once proposed during a thunderstorm, the names of her favorite students, a recipe for lemon bars written entirely from memory. One night I asked if she missed her family. She was quiet for a long time. "I miss who they used to be," she said, before they started counting everything in dollars. I didn't know what to say, so I just reached for her hand, and we sat in silence. Sometimes silence says more than words. I started getting letters. A local nurse emailed to ask if I'd speak to her students about compassionate aging. A university professor invited me to a caregiver panel. A reporter came by one afternoon and interviewed me for a small online article. The headline read, "From Aid to Advocate, One Young Woman's Mission to Change Elder Care." Eleanor cried when she saw it. She made me print 10 copies. "I want to hand them out to the other residents," she said. "You're famous now." "Not really. To me, you are." And for the first time in my life, I believed it. Not because of the article, not because of the attention, but because I had become something no one in my childhood ever told me. I could be capable, strong, meaningful. We started a new project in the spring of year 3. With permission from the facility, I began a weekend workshop called Kind Endings, a program for young volunteers to learn how to connect with aging residents. It was simple at first. Just folding chairs in the common room worksheets I made at home, and a whiteboard with the words, "It's not about saying goodbye. It's about showing up before it's too late." The program grew faster than I expected. Within months, we had more volunteers than residents. Local high schoolers signed up for service credit, then stayed because they wanted to. We created memory boxes with residents, painted birdhouses, held story circles. Eleanor loved every minute of it. She called herself the unofficial grandmother of Kind Endings. She'd sit near the door in her wheelchair and wave at each person who entered. Once a teenage girl brought her a flower crown. Eleanor wore it all day. This, she said, pointing to the volunteers. "This is what legacy looks like." I didn't correct her, because she was right again. It happened on a Tuesday morning, the kind of morning where the sun didn't blaze but glowed gently like it knew not to be too harsh. I had brought Eleanor her favorite tea chamomile with a splash of honey and a fresh journal, though we hadn't written anything new in weeks. She hadn't been herself lately, more tired, less talkative. Her once sharp glances, now slower, softer, but never fearful, never angry. Just tired in a way I couldn't fix. I found her in her recliner by the window, the one we called her poetry chair. She was wrapped in her lavender shawl, the one her husband had given her, a closed book in her lap, and one hand resting gently on her chest. Her tea sat untouched on the side table. There was no struggle, no medical emergency, no last gasp, just stillness. Stillness that said, "I have nothing left to carry." I stood there for a long time, maybe too long. Part of me thought if I didn't speak, didn't move, maybe time would reverse itself, that I'd hear her voice again, that she'd open her eyes and say something silly like, "Did you know turtles breathe through their butts?" But she didn't, and so I sat beside her, took her hand in mine and whispered, "Thank you." The nurse on duty came in quietly and nodded with understanding. No rush, no clipboard, no noise. We called hospice, then the director. A few residents peeked through the doorway, but said nothing. Eleanor had been everyone's favorite. The funeral was small, exactly how she wanted it. No flowers, no dramatic eulogies, just a reading of her favorite poem and a bench placed beneath the oak tree outside Silver Pines, with her name carved into the wood. I didn't cry that day. Not because I wasn't grieving, but because the tears had already come and gone. She hadn't just passed. She had prepared me to let go, and that was her final gift. The funeral was nearly over when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I was standing near the oak bench, quietly thanking the last few guests, nurses, 2 volunteers from Kind Endings, and an elderly man who used to play chess with Eleanor on Thursdays, when the sleek black car pulled into the lot. The doors opened slowly, like a scene rehearsed for effect. First came the sun. Expensive suit sunglasses, that stiff posture people adopt when they want to look dignified at the last moment. Then his wife in black heels too sharp for the lawn. Behind them, 2 adult grandchildren, one scrolling on his phone, the other adjusting her lip gloss in the car window before stepping out. They looked around like tourists at someone else's grief. I didn't say a word. They approached, slowly hesitating just enough to make their arrival feel performative. The son stepped forward first and opened his arms like I was someone he had missed. "You must be Maya," he said with a practiced softness. "We've heard a lot about you." I said nothing. We weren't notified about her decline, the wife added. If we had known. I looked past them toward the empty chair where Eleanor used to sit during the garden gatherings. She had been declining for months, I replied. Quietly, peacefully, with people who were here. He cleared his throat. Regardless of what happened in the past, she was still our mother, and we came to say goodbye. I nodded toward the chapel. You can go inside. You have 5 minutes. They did, reluctantly casting glances at the modest flower arrangement Eleanor had specifically requested not be extravagant. They didn't stay long. Afterward, as I gathered the leftover programs and folded the donation slips for kind endings, the daughter-in-law came back. She gave me a tight smile, the kind that never reached the eyes. So, about the estate, she said lightly, like asking for a Wi-Fi password. I assume there's a will. I met her gaze flat and unmoved. There is. Her eyes brightened just slightly. Wonderful. We'll need to discuss how things will be divided. I folded the final program slowly, deliberately. She made her wishes very clear, I said. You'll find out tomorrow. She didn't like that, but she smiled anyway. I'd seen that kind of smile before, the kind that always came right before someone asked for something they didn't deserve. The law office smelled like old leather and polished wood. I arrived 15 minutes early, not because I was nervous, but because I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 1,000 times. The hallway was quiet, the receptionist soft-spoken. Mr. Halverson, Eleanor's attorney, had been with her since her husband passed decades ago. He greeted me with a nod and led me into the conference room. At the center of the table sat a sealed envelope and a small mahogany box. I recognized it immediately. Eleanor kept it on her nightstand for years, though she never let anyone open it. When the time comes, she used to say, it'll know where to go. A few minutes later, the door opened. They entered with the grace of people who assumed the room already belonged to them. The son walked in first, adjusting his cufflinks. His wife followed her heels, echoing sharply on the tile. The 2 grandchildren trailed behind one, filming a video discreetly for his followers. Big day ahead. Family legacy meeting before being told to put his phone away. No one said hello. Mr. Halverson cleared his throat. This is the last will and testament of Eleanor Ruth Chambers. He began dated March 14th of this year. Miss Maya, as requested, please open the box. My hands were steady as I lifted the lid. Inside was Eleanor's brooch silver with a faded sapphire center, and beneath it a USB drive and a folded letter. I passed the drive to Mr. Halverson. He plugged it into a nearby monitor. The screen flickered, then lit up. There she was, Eleanor, sitting in her poetry chair, sunlight across her face. She looked tired, but calm. Her voice, though faint, still carried the quiet authority of a woman used to being heard. If you're watching this, she began, I've passed. And if the people I think are in this room are actually here, I suppose some things never change. Her son shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His wife pursed her lips. Eleanor continued, let me be clear. I, Eleanor Ruth Chambers, being of sound mind and body, do hereby leave the entirety of my estate. This includes my savings, my property, my investments, and all royalties from my published work to Maya Elena Reyes. The room froze. My name hung in the air like a struck bell. All of it, she said again. No division, no exceptions. Her son stood up. This is absurd. She was our mother. She was confused, the wife said. You took advantage of her mental state. Mr. Halverson calmly retrieved a folder from his briefcase. Mrs. Chambers completed a full cognitive evaluation 2 weeks prior to recording this. She was alert, coherent, and medically declared of sound mind by a licensed geriatric psychologist. You must have manipulated her, the granddaughter hissed. You were just a nurse. I looked down at the letter still in the box, unfolded it. It was addressed to me. Maya, you stayed. You made the tea. You read the poems. You held my hand when the world forgot me. You didn't take care of me for money. That's why I trust you with what I've built. Use it to build something more. Love, Eleanor. Her grandson muttered, She can't just cut out her own family. Mr. Halverson looked up. There is a no contest clause in the will. Any attempt to challenge it in court will forfeit your right to any portion, including personal effects. Silence. Then the son leaned back in his chair, jaw tight. "This will ruin us," he said to his wife. "No," I said, finally speaking. "You ruined yourselves the day you walked away from her." His gaze snapped to me. "You were her son, but I was the one who showed up, every day, for 7 years. Not for money, not for legacy, for her." He opened his mouth to argue, but there was nothing left to say. Mr. Halverson stood. "That concludes the reading of the will. Miss Reyes will begin the transfer process this week." They didn't slam the door when they left, but they might as well have, because what they truly wanted had already left with Eleanor. They didn't leave quietly. The moment we stepped outside the law office, I heard the sharp tap of heels behind me. I turned slowly, already knowing who it was. "You think this makes you better than us?" the daughter-in-law snapped. Her voice was low but venomous. "You manipulated an old woman into handing everything over. You're a glorified maid." I stared at her, not blinking. "She wasn't manipulated," I said calmly. "She was loved. There's a difference." Behind her, the son crossed his arms. "We're her family, by blood. That means something." "It meant something," I replied. "But meaning fades when it's left unattended for 7 years." The grandson stepped forward, eyes flashing. "We'll go public. Let people know what you did. That she was declining, that you tricked her. No one will believe you deserve any of it." I almost laughed, but didn't. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick envelope. "This contains Eleanor's cognitive assessments signed by 2 licensed doctors," I said. "Also included 3 years of journal entries she wrote about every visit you never made, handwritten letters, video footage from her last birthday where she cried because none of you called. If you want to go public, be my guest." The granddaughter looked away. I wasn't finished. I reached into my coat pocket and held out a second envelope, smaller, older. I handed it to the son. He hesitated before tearing it open. Inside were 3 words written in Eleanor's careful script: "You left first." He folded the note quickly, his face turning pale. His wife stepped back, silent now. They didn't speak again. Not a curse, not a threat. Just silence. The kind of silence that hangs in the air, when the truth is finally louder than the lies. I turned away not because I was done, but because there was nothing left to prove. And some victories don't need applause. Just peace. 6 months later, the house felt quieter than ever. Not lonely, just still. The kind of stillness that only comes when a storm has passed and the ground is finally beginning to settle. I kept Eleanor's shawl draped over the back of her poetry chair. Her favorite teacup stayed on the shelf, chipped but cherished. And every morning I made chamomile tea and placed it by the window just like before. Some days I missed her so deeply it ached. Other days it felt like she had never left at all, because everywhere I turned, she was there. I used a portion of the inheritance to purchase a small cottage-style house near the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just wide enough for a few beds and quiet enough for peace. We painted the door lavender and planted sunflowers in the yard. We called it Kind Endings House. It became a home for those at the edge of goodbye, people with no family, no visitors, no one left to remember them by name. But inside our little house they were seen, they were held, they were honored. We played music in the mornings. Volunteers read poetry in the afternoons. We kept a memory wall in the kitchen filled with notes, drawings, recipes, and photos. One woman taught us how to make dumplings from scratch. Another helped paint a mural in her final week. And when one of them passed, we planted a flower in the garden and whispered their name aloud. Not because it changed anything, but because someone had to remember. Last spring, a girl named Eva, just 16, joined our program. Her grandmother had passed in a facility where no one had stayed. She told me she didn't want anyone else to feel that kind of absence. She built her own fall alert bracelet using a microchip and scrap parts. When she saw it working, she gasped and whispered, "It actually works." I gave her Eleanor's brooch. She believed in building things that last, I told her. Now it's your turn. I still live simply. No flashy car, no headlines. Just mornings with tea, evenings with stories, and a calendar filled with lives worth remembering. Sometimes I think about that day at the nursing home when Eleanor's family left her and left me with nothing but a bed and a broken heart. And then I look around at what we've built. Not revenge, not inheritance, legacy. Real living legacy. Tonight before bed, I'll sit by the window and sip tea under the same moon she used to love. I'll wind her brooch between my fingers like a keepsake, and I'll whisper the same words she once said to me. You stayed. You loved. You gave more than you were ever given. And then I'll smile, because I know that's enough.